Okay, cool. So, we've been talking a little bit, or a lot, about soils as a classical and super important, inescapable resource to be managed, paid attention to, preserved in a park context. There's been a couple of class sessions wandering around Thompson Woods talking about different ways in which this, the physical reality of soils shows up. So if we have kaolinitic ultisols in the national parks of the American Southeast, so heavily weathered, aluminum ore-based soils, same kind of soils you find down in the Amazon, super weathered and nutrient depleted, versus a clay vertisol here in Thompson Woods. You manage those very differently in terms of the erosion patterns that each one has, but they both are susceptible to this positive feedback cycle of starting with organic matter removal and pulverization in no particular order, and ending or resetting the cycle for the next season with gully erosion. So we were out in Thompson Woods taking a look at what it means to actually see this out there, and we talked through the tool of trail slope alignment angle. So out there with compasses and figuring out what direction is the hill facing, what direction is the trail running, what's the angle between those two. And based on that, based on how the trail designers have sort of laid this physical installation of a trail facility, it's a part of the built environment of your park, what kind of management impacts we should expect. Trail erosion, gully erosion, stuff like that. And today the vision is to move kind of one step further in our discussion and our understanding of soil impacts, particularly with respect to how water potentiates this process, sort of helps make this happen. We don't have gullies without gully washer storms and the water that those contribute to overland flow. So the goal for today is to talk through a couple more sets of slides. Sorry about that. And then maybe head back outside and do a little bit more detailed measure of some of these impacts. So trail slope alignment angle tells us where we're probably going to have a problem, or where, based on super basic soil physics, we will have a problem. And we can fix it, but then it'll be a problem again. Or we can address the situation, change the trail slope alignment angle by shutting down that section of trail and building a more sustainable section around it. It's called relocating or relo. And today's effort outside is cross-sectional soil loss analysis. So for those of you who've taken any of the watershed classes, this is the exact same set of measurements as stream gauging. We're setting up measurement of the 3D shape, or at least the 2D shape of a trail, and then extrapolating that forward and backward along the trail to figure out what volume of soil have we lost. And so that is putting a number to this concept that we've found and mapped to our ability to figure out trail slope alignment angle. Today we're going to start looking at the scale, the severity, the intensity of that impact out in the field. So in order to get to that point, let's just go through a few things. So I've got this cycle back up on the screen. We had it on the the chalkboard the other day, but here it is up in PowerPoint format. So this is not something new to us. This is just a reminder of where we've been so we know where we're going. And here in Thompson Woods, we don't have a lot of examples of really, really, really intensive gully erosion, right? We've got widths of trails up to about 1 meter or so in Thompson Woods. The widest trails are about 1 meter wide. That's pretty wide for a foot trail. That might typically be more like 40 or 50 centimeters wide in terms of an actual specified constructed tread surface. So we're looking at a doubling of size or area of impact in that case. But in your national park, in all of the national parks I've ever been to, the scope and the intensity of the problem can be much, much bigger. So this is an old photograph from one of your textbooks for this semester that we've got PDFs of on the course website. This is gully erosion where the gully is as big or larger than the people hiking the trail. So this is lots and lots of cubic meters of soil just gone from this space, washed down into whatever creek is downslope from this, or whatever pond. All right? This is also, at this level, this is a social impact too, because when you ask hikers how it feels to walk along a trail like this in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where we have some trails like this. So the Cherokee National Forest, for example, not far from Great Smokies. People say, I'm sure it was a really scenic hike. I just didn't see anything because I had dirt walls on both sides of me. And it's not at all impossible to find spots where this is more than 3 or 4 feet deep. We can go 10 to 15 feet deep, right? 5 meters deep in some of these incisions through the soil matrix in order to move people from point A to point B. So we would consider that an abject failure. There's no way that water can flow across this and continue across the landscape the way it did before this trail was present. All of that water is definitely getting trapped in that trough or that trench, or that slit gully. Okay? So, we've seen some of these statistics, but let's take a look at some just of these example photos. So motorized recreation, again, is absolutely capable of doing what hikers would take maybe a decade or more to do typically. With a single like motocross or wall climbing event like this is called wall crawling or wall climbing in these particular social groups. It can do this in a weekend, right? What it would take regular other humans a decade or more to do. And so this is absolutely and permanently changing both the soil structure and function and the hydrologic regime function and sort of structure through time, right? So this is example for why you as a manager sometimes have to use the most powerful word in the English language, which is no. Sometimes you just can't make certain activities sustainable or protective of the obligate resources, the species, that have to depend on that space existing and functioning. You can't make certain activities sustainable in those places. And so you limit use. Strategy 4 out of 4, we take the nuclear option. So this is pretty clear and straightforward in terms of why people like to do this stuff, in terms of motivation. Cognitively speaking, right, a big reason for why people like to go and do things outdoors is the so-called joy of movement. And if you can get your internal combustion engine, or these days your battery-powered electric four-wheel or all-wheel drive transmission to do the heavy lifting of the motion for you, it's all upside and no downside. Because you don't own this area, you don't have to worry about any impacts. You go, have your fun, and then you get to leave, unless you get caught, right? So impacts very much like this are or have been characteristic problems at places like Denali National Park, where there's not supposed to be any motorized recreation at all. People are breaking into the park. They're crossing or cutting fence lines, cutting bolts on gates, for example, driving through with four-wheelers, rolling through, tearing things up. And if you don't catch them, well, then you're out of luck. You are just dealing with their impacts, and they go on and live their lives. So it can be a very, very frustrating thing. It can be a bit of an arms race between four-wheelers, off-road motorcyclists, trail riders on horses, horse enthusiasts, for example, here on the Shawnee, rock climbers out in the American Southwest, all across Bureau of Land Management land, where BLM doesn't really know how or doesn't get really excited about interfacing with the climbing community to develop routes safely and sustainably. So the climbers just go ahead and do it anyway. And they're creating very similar kinds of soil and bedrock impacts and very soft sandstone when climbing, analogous to if you just think of this trail but tip 90 degrees onto a vertical rock face, right? The erosion potential is still there, and it's even higher on a rock face, even though we're not, in most rock climbing that I'm familiar with, we're not driving knobby tires and shredding that soil or that rock. But if the only soil is a tiny little pocket that's 1 millimeter thick and 5 millimeters wide and deep, in a particular handhold, right? Developing or cleaning that handhold for climbing purposes is a total extirpation of that entire microhabitat, that tiny little sort of 1 centimeter square patch of soil. So it really do be like that sometimes, okay? So again, on the top left image, we have very deep soil incision, and people actually hate hiking through that area. And then down on this bottom right section, we have that dune incision phenomenon, where trampling the vegetation, even with a single pass of bare feet or flip-flopped feet at the beach, can cause a dune to incise down to unconfined sand, the soil type, and then erode away from that incision in both directions until there is no more dune at all. And the next storm or the next neap tide or very high tide just washes all that vegetation material out into the ocean or blasts it back up into the dune complex, wherever it goes. Okay, so we're thinking here both from the ranger's perspective and from the recreationist's perspective, right? So here we have an artifact of the aughts, a sick GoPro edit. And wow, nice crossfades, okay? Do you see the erosion happening as a function of recreation? Now, for some people, this is just the price tag you pay. And we have a little bit of soil erosion, so we send out a trail crew and fix this each spring or over winter each year. And some folks see this and are like, no, I'm not going to do a bunch of sweat equity to maintain this trail so somebody can just go back through and tear it up again and again and again. So it becomes very much an issue of what is the recreation mandate of your agency. If this is a national recreation area, well then we're looking to potentially host, to be the pressure valve for everybody who wants to do this kind of highly erosive recreation. Right? It's a very specific kind of mountain biking or cross-country biking that has the combination of speed and swoopiness, or turning degrees per meter of forward progress along the trail. So what's the trail's curviness or sinuosity, right? And topography. If this is in a very flat area, we just don't have to worry about the wheels biting in so much right there. Not a big deal. But in this particular case, we sure do. Okay? So, all is not to demonize any of these activities, right? There's a time and a place and an ecosystem that is resistant to these impacts, for sure. The question is, are the people looking to do that recreation in those places that are resistant, or are they looking to do it kind of everywhere else? And often the answer is, unfortunately, everywhere else. So this is never not going to be a thing. This is just a part of human nature as far as I can figure, right? So this is reverse dune wall crawling. And if you think about it, this is also an impact for our airbase resources because, right, you stomp that accelerator down to the firewall and bury the RPMs in the red, right? So redline the engine, high torque, climb backwards up the sand dune in this case. And the gas that we're emitting to do that, or to put the plane in the air to go skydiving or whatever, right? That carbon is going to be around for the next century. Okay? So, quick limbic payoff. Whoo, this is fun, this is exciting. Can my vehicle handle this? Am I going to roll and cartwheel down? And a century of a price tag for it. Okay? So, Just a couple other illustrative images. When we're talking about profile truncation, when we're talking about eroding the trail surface away from the top, right? This is going down through the layers or strata or vertically stacked sections of soil one by one. And like we talked about in Thompson Woods, where you can see exposed roots in the trail, this is evidence of at least sheet erosion, because for most shallow rooting species, they're not sending out roots across the surface over the soil. They are, the top of the root is at least a couple of inches down. So we're at least a couple of inches down plus the height of the roots in terms of soil lost in that area. So this, cataloging these spots and just holding a ruler up to these, was sort of the old school 1970s and 80s version of figuring out, okay, do we have a problem with soil erosion here? The qualitative answer, the basic yes-no answer is yes when we see these roots. But today's activity of cross-section area measurement is the advanced version of this, where we're actually reconstructing what the original tread surface was and then measuring down from that in several places to see how much space our trail is sweeping out, how much volume our trail is sweeping out as you move along it. Okay. So a couple more examples of this. Trail proliferation. This is at Denali National Park. Right? We can see, we talk about extra trails that are parallel and going to the same place as trail grades or duplicative impacts. Right? So if we have to put up with a little bit of wildlife damage from having a trail there in the first place, if we just got to do it, then we accept that as managers. And we manage those wildlife and those vegetative species and communities accordingly. But where we have a lot of trails going to the same place, kind of in parallel to each other, well, that's a lot of impact, but we're not getting any extra utility out of all of that extra impact. It's just duplicative or proliferative impact. And these can be large scale or small scale, right? So this is a shot across, I believe, the Savage River Valley in Denali National Park. How cool is that? The river's called the Savage River. Anyway, sounds like a Jack London novel. It can be seen from a mile or two away, or it can be super close in. So for those of you who were on summer camp this past summer, we were right here. This is C&O Canal National Historic Park. There's the canal, that blue line. Here's the flat water that we walked next to. Here's the Potomac River and those 80-foot cliffs channelizing it on both sides. And all of these red squiggles are trails that visitors have created over time that we mapped. And if you straighten out all those polyline segments and compare them against the total length of the blue or designated or formal or on purpose or agency managed trails, there's anywhere from, depending on the park or depending on the section of the park that you're looking at, anywhere from typically 2 to 5 times as much visitor-created trails, so a lot of duplicative impact versus what the Park Service, in this case, working with the Nature Conservancy in a co-management setup at C&O Canal, what they signed up for, what this project was designed to cause in terms of environmental impact, acceptable environmental impact, so that we can run visitors, recreationists through this area sustainably, right? So 5 times, think about if you have like one cavity that you caused and then maybe you get a bacterial infection in your mouth and you have 5 more cavities on top of that. It's like, man, this is so much worse than it could be. I could just be dealing with 1 cavity, now I've got 6. That's the kind of situation that we're looking at here, okay? So it can't get that bad. It absolutely does get that bad. And for those of you who were on summer camp this year, you walked this section of trail and you saw what that looked like. Pretty beat down all over the place. Okay? So, muddy spots are evidence of where this soil is going to, right? If you think of where water flows and then stops, and water is typically what's carrying our soil particles along a trail, well, they're going to stop in depressional spots, lower spots, relative to anywhere else, and all of the soil that, or the dirt that water was transporting, is going to get deposited right there, and that saturated soil is going to stay nice and soft, and it's going to stay nice and soft because we're going to keep punching holes deeper into it with ruts, right? Each rut, hydrologically speaking, is another stream channel within the broader context of the trail. So here again, we have a self-reinforcing problem, right? We have people driving along a spot causing compaction and erosion, and together those are called subsidence, and then that traps water, and then that watery soil gets a bunch of additional slits cut into it or pushed into it or pressed into it by more feet, more hooves, more tires rolling across that wet spot. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you can literally see it from space. Okay? So here is the Savage River Basin at Denali National Park looking the other direction. Okay? So this is, I guess this would be the west slope. This is looking toward the east. And this is the spot where visitors can drive with their own vehicle into the wilderness of Denali National Park. And they can go no further. Everything beyond this point, across the bridge, has to be permitted and typically on, like, basically school buses that the Park Service and concessionaires operate. So this is a spot, this is as deep as you can get with your just sort of casual car camper approach. And so everybody gets as far as this parking lot and then stops at the little bathroom right there, gets bored, and gets the same great idea as everybody else, walks right along the river, creating an additional stream channel, and then, or separately, goes up a bunch of different ways, and everybody likes to go up to the high spot. Now, evolutionary anthropologists have suggested that the human impulse or drive or motivation to go to the highest place nearby and look out across it is a survival mechanism, right? So in the veldt or the African savanna, it was very important to have a high vantage point so you could see the tail of the lionesses stalking your meandering tribe as you were walking through the grasslands. So this makes sense. What doesn't make sense, ecologically speaking, is this is going straight up the slope, this is going straight up the slope, these two are going straight up the slope. All of these are duplicative impacts. And so for a wilderness-based national park like Denali National Park is, with its mission specifically stating in the creating legislation that caused Denali National Park to go into existence, this shall be a trailless, trackless area so that it feels more wild. We're not going to put in a bunch of trails. The visitors do it anyway. So our project up there was to even start finding all of these trails across 5, 6, 10 million acres of space. That's a big thing. That's a difficult thing to do. And so part of our work in assessing these visitor-created trails with basic, super basic survey field tools is to get out and walk the trails, because you have to put yourself on the trail. You can't tell from a mile away, like this photo is this a grizzly wildlife trail or a caribou trail? Both large species that have to move through this, this Alaskan tundra and sort of crash their way through and have every metabolic incentive to use any trails or roads that humans do create to save even just a couple of calories per day. That might be the difference between starvation and survival, or being able to carry young through to term for live birth. So we have wildlife adopting trails that humans make that are totally unsustainable, that are causing crazy amounts of erosion and lots of injuries, lots of rolled ankles in a spot like this because none of these trails are particularly safe. It gets bad. Also, the same phenomenon exists in much flatter areas, much hotter areas. So this is Petroglyph National Monument in New Mexico. And as you can see, there is a subdivision right along the eastern edge of it. And so this is like an absolutely unique, unsubstitutable, irreplaceable
place, and it's literally in people's backyards. You can see how people with dogs, for example, have every incentive to walk in a visitor-created trail. Right? These red trail segments are visitor-created. And just kind of explore. Walk your dog, stretch your legs. Enjoy this beautiful national park, but cause a whole bunch of damage. The problem with visitors creating trails in places like Petroglyph versus trails in places like Denali is, in Denali we can close down the trails, we can do some revegetation, plant some of that tundra veg, keep people away from that area, and 10, 20, 50 years later it will be undetectable, right? Those renaturalized plants can take root, can regenerate some of that soil slowly over time. Here, where people are trampling on, breaking, in some cases in bad faith, in some cases just unaware, where we're walking on human cultural remains, there's no revegetation for that. We can't make those potsherds again, not validly. Right? So once that stuff is gone or destroyed or exposed by soil transport, that's a one-way street. And that is when the National Park Service gets in super, super big bad trouble. Right? That's called a permanent impairment to the quality or function of the resource being protected versus not. So this is our reality these days, right? Like, that's a pretty sick photo. That's also like a season worth of work for rehabilitating this psychologically, right? So we pay a lot of attention to this stuff. And we do want to mention a couple other things, just kind of tagging things along. The reason that you and I were all restricted from setting up a campfire in a lot of places, we have to use a little backpacking stove and no hiking around for dragging wood back and stuff like that, is partly for these really marginal places where it's that bad and we have such little soil biological activity, so soil microbes, for example, that a single campfire for a single night can not just sterilize that little area by heat, but by leaving the potash, the highly combusted potassium-rich ash that is highly chemically active and forms in the presence of rainwater, potassium hydroxide, which is a strong base, the kind of base that gives you chemical burns. Settlers used to make soap out of rendered fat, so boiled animal fat, and wood ash, or potash. And with the saponification reaction, you're basically making lye soap that cleans partly from, emulsifying the dirts and oils off of your skin in solution in water, but also by just kind of like stripping off the outer layer of your skin, right? And if you peel off that dirty layer chemically, you pay a dermatologist a lot of money these days to do that kind of stuff, I guess. That's another way to get clean, right? And campfires are generating this chemical. They're liberating, again, the potassium ion in the matrix of wood as just a basic mineral pulled out of the soil by the plant and returning it to the soil, but in a way that forms a strong base chemically and that can just utterly destroy the pH for that entire area. And a relatively large plume or discharge space downslope from where that campfire is. So it's not at all uncommon to be up near tree line, Roosevelt National Forest or something like that out west, Fish Lake, whatever, and you see somebody's decades old campfire ring that nobody has used in years and years and years, and that whole patch doesn't have anything growing around it because of this soil sterilization effect. But then also, again, this sort of just like denuded soil outwash fan below that is also killed off. And that's not great, because if there's nothing that can grow in that plume of steep soil, well then now we got more erosion. And it's not just erosion of dirt, but it's chemically adulterated dirt that is sterilizing everything on its way down, right? So it's turtles all the way down. It's rough. Campfires in some places are really that bad. So this is why Leave No Trace principles address specifically how to build a campfire in places where it's marginal to do so in the first place, and why why Leave No Trace gives land managers, park rangers, foresters absolute license in saying, look, we just can't make campfires as awesome as they are sustainable everywhere. This is why. So you're not on the hook to provide every campfire to every camper everywhere. Yeah.
I remember when I was first taught how to make a campfire, they said to scrape away all the organic layer.
You're gosh darn right.
Stuff.
Yeah.
So that's something you've heard of.
Yeah, let's talk about that. All right, so what that process of scraping away the organic litter is doing. So here's a soil profile diagram. So O1, A, B, C. Sometimes you have weathered paramaterial, stuff like that. Here's another more detailed soil layer diagram. Not all soil profiles have all of these, but most of them have most of them. What you're doing is you're banking the live, biologically active topsoil, that O horizon, that A1, A2 horizon. And you're trying to get people to scrape down to E, have their fire. The fire's not going to kill anything in the E horizon because there's nothing living there anyway, right? And then you bury everything with O through A horizons, and that's okay, right? That upper set of soil horizons shields that potash from direct, overland flow, rain transports, sterilizing anything downslope, and when you are pushing that stuff back on, you're actually mixing things together, and you're bringing that very high or very alkaline pH down from 12 or 13, the alkaline equivalent of like diluting out or neutralizing a whole bunch of like sulfuric or nitric acid, like the really concentrated mineral acids, really acidic stuff, very low pH. You're bringing that back closer to what the whole thing is, because maybe you've got a little bit of ash and a whole lot, hopefully, of topsoil to mix in with that little bit of ash. And ideally, it's so little chemical and thermal sterilization that you can just overcome it, kind of mix everything together, and in that sense, it actually works as fertilizer. Okay? That's a great question. Right? So, one Leave No Trace campfire technique is to not just sort of scrape the living soil layers aside, but it's actually to sort of create a borrow pile of that stuff and then keep digging down into the mineral soil, put that on top of a tarp, build the fire on top of the soil on top of the tarp, right? And then mix that down into the pit, ash side down, and then put the organics on top of that, so you don't even have to worry about, do I have enough organic material to fill and dilute this? I'm sort of physically sequestering it in its own little cat hole or pit for this fire. It's a ton of extra work. Most people don't do it, even if they understand why they should. So typically the answer in that case behaviorally is, yeah, we can do this, but a lot of people won't. So we're just going to say, no campfires. Welcome to use a stove. Or something like that. Or just, eat overnight oats or something and warm them up in the morning, that kind of thing, on that stove, and just sort of sidestep the issue completely. Now, campfire restrictions, super unpopular, right? Has anybody else ever spent a night like I have just kind of looking at the redneck TV, the campfire in your campsite, and just kind of mellowing out? There's something about just watching random but systematized motion like a plasma, like a fire. I don't know, you could just lose yourself for hours in that, right? A lot of people are that way. So this is not necessarily a popular thing, but sometimes the ecological reality of the situation is not so good. Another reason for restriction of campfires, and this is more in the vegetation section than here in soils, is that in order to gather enough fuel for the fire, you have people moving into, radiating out from the campsite to the forest nearby, or the woodlot or stand or whatever, copse, trees, and dragging back big things, leaving them partially combusted. It's kind of a trashy, half-burned campsite from there, trampling a bunch of stuff to get that stuff. In places like Alaska, the boreal forest is so nutrient limited by the extremely short 3-month-long growing season that it's 24 hours, but 3 months. That if you pull a branch out off the ground, no trees will sprout where that branch was going to decay and lose those nutrients. It's that tight of a budget, right? This is the kind of forest ecosystem where we have grizzly bears essentially fertilizing individual seeds waiting in the seed bank of the soil with their salmon protein-rich droppings, right? So next spring you see a single seedling back from a year-old grizzly pile of scat. Like that is the precarious balance, nutrient-wise, that a lot of these places that we're managing this semester face, and that's okay, right? If you're dealing with Kodiak Island grizzly boreal forest habitat, then yeah, maybe you can't do campfires there because my goodness, like that's all of the nutrients for that entire area, and they'll go 10 feet out from the campsite, and then they'll go 20 feet out, and then the next season they have to go 30 or 40 feet out, and then the next season after that they gotta go 50 or 60 feet out, and then the next season after that we have to do a search and rescue thing because this person was outside of their campsite, traveling cross country, trying to drag a big old stick back, and they stepped in a stump hollow or something like that and hyperextended their knee and can't self-rescue their way out. Right? So building campfires has a lot of costs associated with it, as awesome as they are. So appreciate your next campfire. They're pretty sustainable around here. We're not going to run out of good forest soil microbe activity, and certainly not enough, certainly plenty enough wood here in Southern Illinois. We're not going to be in any dire straits there. All right, so any questions about soil impacts? Cool.